Hello everyone, we are group number 9 and our group is composed by Isenia Marisol Rivas Salas, María Elena Castro Labor, Marvin Francisco Pérez Calderón, Héctor Giovanni Valencia Pérez, and myself, Rocío Yamilet Orellana. Our research protocol is called Classroom Discipline and Classroom Engagement Techniques to help teaching practice to students to improve their performance at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019. To begin with this presentation, I'm going to start with the chapter 1, statement of the problem, and the description of the problem. To carry out this study, researchers went to teaching practice 2 to ask students about the issues they were facing during their practice. And they answered that they have problems related with classroom management. However, classroom management was too broad to study, so the researchers decided to take just 2 issues that were classroom discipline and classroom engagement, since those were the most prominent. The students agreed to be part of the investigation, so the following research questions arose. How can teaching practice to students do for overcoming their classroom discipline and classroom engagement issues in the major o licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza, at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019? How can teaching practice to students cope with classroom discipline during their practices in the major o licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza, at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019? How can teaching practice to students engage their pupils during their practices in the major o licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza, at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019? Then we have the objectives. The first one, the general objective, it says, to help teaching practicum to students improve their performance in their practices through a reinforcement of classroom discipline and classroom engagement techniques in the major o licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza, at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019. Then we have the specific objective. To empower teaching practicum to students with classroom discipline techniques and to foster teaching practicum to student class engagement. Then we have the hypothesis of change. It says, if practitioners improve classroom discipline and classroom engagement techniques, they will enhance their teaching practice performance in the major o licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza, at the University of El Salvador, Western Multidisciplinary Campus during semester 1, 2019. And the hypothesis of action, it says, how can teaching practicum 2 practitioners deal with student classroom discipline and classroom engagement during their practices in the major o licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza, at the University of El Salvador, Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019. And
Okay, now to continue with the presentation, I'm going to talk about chapter 2, which is the referential framework. It starts mentioning some concepts that are important for your study, which are University of El Salvador. It is where our study took place. Licenciatura en idioma inglés, opción enseñanza. That's the major where our study took place as well. And teaching practice to students refers to the subject and the target population of our study. And finally, we have actual situation of the problem and historical background. Then we go and define have the concept of discipline. That is the evidence that a class is under control and it is room for learning to take place. Which means that if you have a disciplined classroom, learning will be better because your students will know what you're talking about. If you have disruptive behavior in your classroom, this will affect the flow of your entire class. For example, if you have one student that is constantly talking, he will not pay attention to your class and he will not learn as much as he could. And also, this will interrupt the other students who may want to pay attention. That's why we have the importance of discipline in the classroom. And it says that if there's no discipline, there's no room for learning to take place. Also, we have three different types of discipline, which are supportive, preventive, and corrective. Also, we have different techniques that can be applied in the classroom in order to maintain the discipline. For example, get to know your students. That deals not only knowing your students inside the classroom, but outside it. It's outside of it, sorry. And also use low profile intervention. You will not let your students in ridiculous because he is not paying attention or he's talking. You will use a low profile intervention in order to get him back to your class. Also, use proximity. We have positive discipline, assertive discipline, and make rules together. That basically it's based on having your students sharing what they think is good for the class, as well as your thoughts of what's good for your class and what are your expectations during the course. Then we have classroom engagement. That it assures the commitment that students have paying attention, being attentive, or being passionate about learning, optimistic. This will reflect in the quality of knowledge of learning that they will acquire. Also, we have the importance of engagement in the classroom. That a research has demonstrated that engaging students in their learning process improve their focus, encourages to develop their higher level thinking critical skills, and promotes meaningful learning. This means that the person is not just sitting there, but he also learns and it's curious about it's being taught, and he will look for more information in order to learn more. Also, we have some classroom engagement techniques, which are activity and ownership. Cultivate your engagement method. A simple way to engage. Cooperative learning and empathy level, which consists of having your students know each other, because in this way you will have an environment that flows perfectly, since your students will know each other and they will know how they work among them, and you will also will notice how to work with them and who can help who, and etc. Also, we have believing and doubting, that refers to having the students given a set of ideas, for example, and you make them think about, for example, if you have a controversial topic, you will let them discuss and express their thoughts about that topic. Also, finally, we have promoting student engagement, through active learning. This refers to how students actively participate during classes, not only sitting there, but also to move, to practice what they have learned, and share with the others what they think.
To continue with the presentation, I'm going to talk about chapter 3, that is the methodological design. As first point, we have the paradigm design and the type of study. The paradigm design that we applied for this investigation was a mixed method, since we have qualitative and quantitative data as well. Then we have the type of study that was an action research, since we have a hypothesis of change and a hypothesis of action. Description of the environment. The phenomenon under study was observed in teaching practice to students. From the mayor of Licenciatura en Idioma Inglés, Opción Enseñanza, at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador, located in El Salvador in the department of Santa Ana, in the Avenue Fray Felipe de Jesús Moraga of the colony of Altos del Palmar. And we have that the units of observation were teaching practice to students. The sampling procedure that we applied for this study was the accidental hazard or constant sampling procedure. Through this sampling, the investigators took into account one of the two groups of teaching practice two, since the total population was made of around 102 students. Then we have the operationalization of variables, where we find the variable, the definition of the variable, the dimensions, the indicators, the instruments, and the time. For the data collection instruments, we have 3 data collection instruments. We applied a questionnaire that was addressed for the cooperating teacher to ask them about their students' performance. Then we have the interview that was addressed for teaching practice to students to ask them about their practices. Then we have the observation guide that was filled up by the researchers at the time of observing students' practices. Then we have the approaching the field of study. For this part of the investigation, we took some steps. The first step was to ask in a written form to the head of the department the permission for going to teaching practice and administering the data collection instruments. Then we talked to teacher Francisco Quintanilla for asking them his approval for applying the different data collection instruments as well. Then we explained teaching practice to students the whole process of the investigation, and they signed a verbal contract where they got in agreement with the conditions of the investigation, and they agreed to be part of the study. And then we applied the 3 data collection instruments. The methods to analyze the information were that for the quantitative data we created some graphs with the help of Excel, and for the qualitative data we created some tables with the help of a word processor that was Microsoft Word. Then we have the validation of the data collection instruments that were under the aspect of reliability and validity. We asked for an expert in the field to validate our data collection instruments before administering. The ethical aspects that we took into account were transparency, confidentiality, objectivity, anonymity, and respect. We gave the guarantee to teaching practice to students to keep their information in an anonymous way to make this study as transparent and objective as possible. For the plan of action, we carry out a workshop that consisted in 10 classroom discipline and classroom engagement techniques. For the first week, we taught 5 classroom discipline techniques. For the second week, we taught 5 classroom engagement techniques. And for the third week was a reinforcement of the 10 techniques. And we have the timeline and the budget where we detail the supplies that were pens, pencil, printer, ink, green and bond paper, fastener folders, which made up 30 cents. Then we have the services that were was photocopies, internet, and other expenses. Snacks for the final presentation that made up 50 to 20 cents. And
I will continue with chapter number 4, which is the analysis and interpretation of data. For this chapter, it's pretty important to mention that we as researchers decided to classify the data by objectives. Also, it is pretty important to mention that we make use of 3 different tools. The first one was an observation guide, and the second one was a questionnaire which was addressed to the cooperating teachers, and the last one an interview which was addressed to teaching practice to students. And as you can see, we have graph C, classroom discipline techniques that teaching practice to students apply. We got this graph from the observation guide, and the most important point of this graph is that we as researchers, of the majority of us, answer that the technique that the students use the most is get to know your students. And then we have graph C4, classroom discipline techniques application in practicum classes. We obtained this graph from the questionnaire addressed to cooperating teachers. As you can see, the majority of them, of the 50% of them, answered that their students frequently apply discipline techniques, and the 40% of them answered that sometimes they apply discipline techniques, and just the 10% of cooperating teachers said that they hardly ever apply them. And then we have graph C5, classroom discipline techniques that teaching practice to students apply. We obtained this graph from the interview that we addressed to the students, and the majority of them answered that they make use of proximity. And then the 30% of the students answered that they use low profile innovation, and just the 20% answer that they use get to know your students. And then we have graph D1. It is very important to mention that we obtained this graph, or we classified this graph by the second objective. And it says classroom engagement techniques, teaching practice to students apply. We obtained this graph from the observation guide, and here we have 2 main points. The first one is that we observe, or the 80% of researchers observe, that students apply a simple way to engage. And also the 80% of researchers observe that the students apply promoting student engagement to active learning. And then we have graph D2, regularity teaching practice students apply engagement techniques. The majority of students said that we got this graph from the questionnaire addressed to the cooperating teachers. So the majority of cooperating teachers said that the students sometimes apply engagement techniques, and the 30% of cooperating teachers said that they frequently apply them, and just the 10% of them said that they hardly ever apply these techniques. And then we have graph D3. Classroom engagement techniques that teaching practice to students apply. We obtained this graph from the interview addressed to the students, and the majority of teaching practicum to students answer that they use a simple way to engage, while the 10% of them answer that they use believing and doubting, and another 10% answer that they make use of promoting student engagement through active learning, and just another 10% answer that they use activity and ownership. And then we have table E. We make 6 tables, but we are going to show you only one. And it says implemented classroom discipline and classroom engagement techniques. Here we have the question: did you foster the majority of classroom discipline and engagement techniques? Yes, no, and why? And here we have the answer: yes, it is necessary to improve each class by having those techniques that students from seminar taught in class. Those are to create a better environment inside the class. And the indicators: types of discipline, classroom discipline techniques, classroom engagement techniques, and then we have the objective from this question, which is the general objective: to help teaching practicum to students improve their performance in their practices through a reinforcement of classroom discipline and classroom engagement techniques in the major of Licenciatura en Idioma Inglés, opción enseñanza, at the Western Multidisciplinary Campus of the University of El Salvador during semester 2, 2019. And then we have the interpretation of the question, which says, improving the class by having classroom techniques. It is important for teaching practice students.
Well, now I will continue talking about chapter 5, which is conclusions and recommendations. After finishing the investigation, researchers got the following conclusions. Researchers found out that teaching practicum to students were not conscious about the importance of knowing and applying the different engagement and discipline techniques to have a controlled and a participatory class. However, according to the data gathered from the tools and after the workshop given, researchers realized that engagement and discipline techniques were helpful for the students and improved their performance when teaching. Moreover, researchers realized that teaching practicum to students, knowing and applying the different engagement and discipline techniques, not only increased their confidence while imparting a class, but also demonstrated to be more prepared at a time to deal with a problem that involves how to engage or discipline students. Moreover, researchers also found out that teaching practicum to students were able to identify all the different discipline techniques to have an appropriate environment to teach. Besides, the researchers realized that the majority of the population studied were more likely to use get to know your students' discipline techniques and empowered the way they applied them. However, researchers realized that according to cooperating teachers, they agreed that the most commonly used discipline technique was use proximity, since students tend to be close and monitoring students. Also, it was observed that teaching practicum to students tried to make use at least one of the discipline techniques
helping them in their teaching performance and achieving the specific objective. Moreover, researchers also realized that engagement techniques may result somehow complicated to fully understand and even to apply. However, student teachers tried to maintain their students to be attentive and actively participating in the classes. That is why it is important to know that is why it is important for teachers information to know the different engagement techniques, not only to enhance the productivity of their students but also have meaningful learning. The target of the researchers was to inform and promote teaching practices to students to apply the different engagement techniques. However, the majority of teaching practices to students were more likely to use a simple way to promote engagement among their students. Moreover, through the investigation, it was noticed that teaching practical to students were not aware of certain things they were doing in the classroom, but demonstrated eagerness to know why they were doing some things or even to understand new things about classroom management, so they could enhance their performance. The data obtained from the tools used showed that the most commonly used discipline techniques were get to know your students according to students and use proximity according to cooperating teachers. At the same time, a simple way to engage was the most used engagement techniques according to students, and a simple way to engage according to cooperating teachers. It was also observed that a change since the diagnosis, a change of how student teachers apply the different engagement and discipline techniques from the diagnosis test to the end of the workshop for students teachers to be aware of certain things that they were doing, having a considerable enhance in the way that teaching practical to students teach. However, it can be concluded that the hypothesis was proved successfully and the implementation of discipline engagement techniques is important in the teaching process. Well, now we are going to continue with the recommendations. After finishing the investigation, researchers got the following recommendation for future student teachers interested in this field. First, students teachers should try to use and put into practice not only one of the discipline and engagement techniques like get to know your students in a simple way to engage, but also all of the discipline techniques like positive discipline, assertive discipline, mix rule together, and engagement techniques, which are cultivate your engagement matter, activity and ownership, believing and doubting, and so on. Student teacher should get out of their comfortable zone and try to implement new discipline techniques and engagement techniques like classroom, like environmental control and technology in the classroom to have a higher level of classroom management. Also, student teachers should look deeper for other types of discipline techniques like non-verbal pen, environmental control, and direct instruction in order to have a richer knowledge about how to discipline the students. Then we have the last one, and it says a student teacher should continue investigating for other types of engagement techniques like writing, prepare class before class, and technology in the classroom to not to be tempted to be using the same engagement techniques while teaching. Well, that was all for our presentation, and I hope that the information will be useful and helpful for you. Thanks for watching.